Hello everyone, welcome back to the new video. So in this video we are going to look at what happens whenever you enter an URL what happens behind the scenes, how you are able to get the web page. Whenever you type any website such as the google.com, you are able to see the particular web page, the search bar. So without any further delay, let's start this video. So what actually happens is that whenever you type any URL in your web browser, so web browser is also called as the client which is making the request to the server. So you type www.google.com. so you can also have in some of the URL the path as well as the resource that you wanted to find. So you might have seen in some of the URLs there is a search, or if you wanted to say like get the hello world, right? So this basically hello world is the resource that you wanted to find, and this is called the path, and this is called the domain name. So whatever you type in the web browser is called the URL, which is called the uniform resource locator. And you might also type the HTTPS before entering the URL. So this is called the scheme, hypertext transfer protocol. S is used for the secure transfer, where we wanted to make use of the TLS protocol. The URL in the three parts. So first of all is basically the domain name. This particular thing, google.com, is basically called as the domain name. Second thing is called basically the path to get the resource. We will come back to what is actually the resource. Third thing is basically the resource. Whenever you type this URL, you are able to receive a particular web page in which you get the logo of the Google and the search bar, and there is like a search button, and there were several buttons after it. So this web page is been created in the HTML, CSS and the JavaScript. So this is basically the files of the web page which are being stored on the server. What is server? Server is basically an external computer which has been high in the configuration, which is used to serve the multiple requests of the multiple customers. So it is a very high configuration system which needs to be available 24/7, because we can make request of this website at any time. Each second Google receives the millions of the requests at each second. So to serve all these requests, server needs to be available 24/7. That's why it needs to be keep at the very high configuration. So this server used to store the web page of the google.com. How we reach to that particular server and try to bring the file onto our browser. So browser knows how to render these files. Generally the files we used to receive in the form of the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or maybe the different files such as the images, such as the video. So these videos browser knows how to show it to the user, because these web page are being designed in such a way so that the browser could understand and able to show it to the user. So in that case, browser is basically the client who is making the request to the server to actually get the files of the web page. One thing that we know, that every machine has the unique IP address. IP address in terms is just like a phone number. Like for us, we have the unique phone number for each one of us so that we can contact with one another, and we use the contacts app to basically find the number for the person to whom we wanted to make the contact, because we cannot remember all the mobile numbers to whom we wanted to make a contact. That's why the contacts app is being used to map the mobile number and the name that we can easily remember. So the same case happens here. IP address is basically the unique identifier of every machine in this world. Machine in this sense is basically the computer, or it could be the mobile phone. Every device has the unique IP address. Suppose this server has the and the IP address is basically a 32-bit integer which has the 4 octets separated by the dot. So server IP address you could understand as this is the IP address of the servers through which we can identify this particular device. But how we are going to identify it? By the use of the URL that we type in our browser. So as we know that in the URL we have the domain name. So this particular domain name is being used to identify the server. We used to save the names against the phone number to whom we need to make a call. So in order to easily remember the IP address reach to a particular web page, suppose the google.com, It is very easy to remember: facebook.com or Snapdeal or Flipkart. So these all have the websites, have the different IP addresses, so they all are being hosted, their files are being present, but these domain names are very easy to remember. That's why we make use of them. But we need to make the translate to their particular IP address to basically reach to the server on which files are being stored. So what we do, we make the translation from the domain name to the IP address, which is called the DNS lookup, domain name service. DNS is again a very big concept in itself. We will try to look this in some other video, but just understand that once we get the IP address of this server, we make the connection to that server. We make use of the protocol which is called the TCP, which is called the transmission control protocol. And this transmission control protocol also brings the request parameter with it, like what the client wanted to request, what files that the client actually needs, because client might have the different requirement. Whatever the files that the client needs to access, he needs to provide in the request object. So now the two parameters comes into the picture, which is basically the path and the resource that we want. So path is basically the where the actual files are being stored. So this is the path, is just like similar to files of the google.com are being stored. Currently it has been mapped to the root location, but I am just taking the example. In most of the website you could also see the path and the resource. So this path is used to find where actually the files are being there present in the server location. So this is basically the path. So path is being sent in the request parameter, and same also the what resource that we need to find. So resource is basically the file that we wanted to fetch from the server. And this resource file, sometimes we need to require the HTML file, sometimes not. It has been dynamically created. So this HTML file is being sent to the browser, and once browser receives the response from the server, this response has been identified by the browser, and browser knows how to display these files to the user, because browser knows how to render the HTML, CSS, JavaScript and the images which is being sent by the server. Once we make the request to the server, server has already the written programs that whenever the request of any client comes to it, what files that it needs to look up and what parameters that it needs to look up. It needs to look up the path, it needs to look up the resource. So these all sorts of the programs has already been written onto the server, and once it identifies the file, it sends to the browser. This is how actually behind the scene, whenever you type any URL, so you are able to receive the response from the server. So it is basically the client and the server architecture. This is just a brief introduction how you are able to make the request to the server and able to fetch the pages. You might also notice sometimes you enter any URL and you are unable to fetch the response, and you are unable to fetch the web page. It might say the web page is missing, or you might get the 404 error. So these are the server errors. Maybe the files that you are trying to request are not present onto the server, or maybe, so it is just a basic introduction to see how this request actually works. We will come up with in the next video, try to come up with the playlist for the computer networking. So hope you really like this video. So let's end this video. Till then, bye bye.